So today, we're going to unpack one of the most incredible and honestly cautionary tales in the startup world, the story of Byju's. At one point, this company was the absolute shining star of India's startup scene, and it promised to completely revolutionize education for millions. But then, the story took a very, very dramatic turn. Let's break down how it all went down.
All right, to really get the scale of this story, you have to start with this one number, $22 billion. That's what Byju's was valued at during its absolute peak back in 2022. It wasn't just an education company. It was on its way to becoming a global tech giant.
And then, look at this. Just a couple of years later, some of its biggest investors have slashed that value to less than $200 million. I mean, that's a collapse of over 99%. The value just, poof, evaporated. It's almost unbelievable.
So, yeah, that's the big question, right? How on earth does a company go from being worth $22 billion to, well, basically nothing in such a crazy short amount of time? It's a story of huge ambition, explosive growth, and some really critical missteps.
Okay, so to figure out how it all fell apart, we've got to go back to the beginning. We have to understand the rise. And it all started with one guy who had a genuinely great idea.
Meet Byju Raveendran. And you know, he wasn't your typical tech founder. He was actually a teacher. An engineer who was just so incredibly good at making complicated stuff simple that he had students literally packing stadiums just to hear him teach. His whole mission was pretty simple. Use tech to make learning fun and get it to every single student. And you know what? For a long time, it worked. It worked brilliantly. The company got its start back in 2011, they launched their big app in 2015, and boom, by 2018, it hit that magical unicorn status, a $1 billion valuation. The growth was real, and investors were absolutely lining up to get a piece of it.
But then, something happened. Something nobody could have possibly predicted. A global event that basically poured rocket fuel on Byju's fire and shot its growth into the stratosphere.
Yeah, you can just see it right here. That line goes almost straight up. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down schools all over the world, online learning went from a nice-to-have to an absolute necessity, like overnight. And Byju's, they were in the perfect place at the perfect time. Their valuation just exploded, soaring from a few billion all the way to that peak of $22 billion. So now they're flush with cash, they're overflowing with confidence, and Byju's goes on this epic shopping spree. They snapped up WhiteHat Jr., which taught kids coding, for $300 million. And then, for their biggest play, they spent nearly $1 billion to buy Aakash, a huge chain of actual physical test prep centers. I mean, they were trying to dominate every single part of the education market. But here's the thing. Underneath all that incredible growth, all that hyper-growth, some really serious problems were starting to brew. The pressure to keep those numbers going up and up and up was creating a culture that, well, it was starting to look a lot different from that founder's original dream.
And this is really where the heart of the problem lies. You had the company's public promise, which was amazing, helped students fall in love with learning, but then there was the reality, which, according to a ton of reports, was a super high-pressure, almost toxic sales culture that was allegedly pushing families into taking on debt for expensive courses they just couldn't afford.
Yeah, this summary from reports by former employees, it paints a really grim picture. We're talking about a culture where the only thing that mattered was hitting sales targets, and the tactics allegedly involved emotionally manipulating parents to close a deal, whatever it took. And for some families, that meant taking on crippling loans. This was the real human cost of that crazy growth.
And at the exact same time, you start seeing these massive financial red flags just popping up everywhere. First, the company delays filing its financial reports, not by a month or two, but by a staggering 18 months. When they finally came out, they showed these huge losses. Then, in a huge blow to their credibility, their own auditor, Deloitte, just quit. And soon after that, key investors started leaving the board. You could see the dominoes just starting to fall, one by one.
And just to make everything worse, the world started changing again. As the pandemic eased up, kids went back to the classroom, and that gold rush for online learning, it was over. The very thing that had fueled Byju's incredible rise was suddenly gone, and it exposed all of the internal problems that had been papered over for so long.
So, wow, what a story. What can we actually learn from this absolutely spectacular collapse? Because the story of Byju's is really a powerful case study for pretty much any startup, any investor, any founder out there.
Okay, so let's break down the big lessons here. First, growth at all costs is an incredibly dangerous game. That billion-dollar spending spree,
It happened so fast, it basically hid the fact that the business model might have been broken. Second, governance, basic oversight, isn't just boring paperwork, it's absolutely crucial for survival. I mean, come on, when you delay financial reports for a year and a half and your auditor resigns, that's a massive sign that things are broken. And finally, and this is a big one, valuation is not the same as value. Just because investors slap a huge price tag on your company doesn't mean it's actually healthy or built to last.
The BYJU'S saga is such a harsh reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. But it also makes you wonder about something bigger. Was BYJU'S just a fluke, a sign that the whole dream of using tech to revolutionize education is flawed? Or is this just one of those painful but maybe necessary lessons on the road to actually getting it right?